Today's shiur will begin 12 lines from the top of Daf Pei. Before we begin the actual Gemara, let's glance at the side where we have our topic heading. We call this a tatnose, a sub-topic heading. Maisa shel Baal shehotzi sheish me'os kesef, an incident involving a husband who spent 600 pieces of money, we'll say $600, lahoitzois haderech, expenses for a trip, kedei ligvois arba meas kesef shenoflu lishto, in order to collect $400 that his wife inherited. Umeoisim arba meas lokach kesef echad v'achar kach girsha, and after and from the $400 that he collected, he took $1 for some personal needs, and then he divorced the wife. This, of course, is a continuation of the sugya that we left off with, where we discussed the husband that had invested in his wife's properties, made improvements in them, and we learned in the Mishnah that if he made investments and derived even a little bit of benefit from those properties, and then divorced his wife, he has no right to seek compensation for the investments he made in her property. So now, with that having been said, let's now turn to the Gemara text. Hahi itzah, there was a woman, denoflu lo arba meas zuzi beichozoi. Beichozoi is the name of a place. So in Beichozoi, there was 400 zuz, an amount of money, that was awaiting her as an inheritance. Ozil Gavra, her husband went, apik shismea, he spent $600 on the journey, Isi arba mea, in order to bring the 400. The Bahadi Dikasi, on his way back with the money, Itzterich lechad zuzo, he needed one zuz, v'shokal minah, and he took from the 400 that he was bringing, the 400 that his wife inherited. Also lekamei de Rav Ami. The case came to Rav Ami. The husband is claiming that he spent 600 zuz on the trip. Is he deserving of any compensation? So, Omar Lei, Rav Ami said, and this is called the first stage of Rav Ami's responses, Masha hoitzi hoitzi u'masha ochal ochal. In other words, you don't have any compensation. We've seen this, we mentioned this earlier, and we learned this in the Mishnah, that when a husband makes an investment in his wife's needs, his wife's property, so and he benefited from it, even a very small amount, so that's it, too bad, no compensation. Amrulei Rabbanon Rav Ami, Hani milihecha dekoach alpira. The halacha of masha otzi hotzi masha ochal ochal, that's where he ate the fruits, he ate the produce produced from the property that he had invested in. But in this case, it's not a function of his eating fruits. Hakarna ka'achil, the hotza he ate from the principal, which is meaning from the 400 zuz in cash that he brought. He took from that, and he had made an investment in acquiring that. Omar lahu im kain have lay. Then, if that be the case, so then it's a case of hoitzi v'lo ochal, making expenditures and not having received any benefit from the peiros. Yishava kama hoitzi vito. Then the law is he swears how much he had spent and gets compensation. Yishava kama hoitzi v'yitol. Before we go further in the Gemara, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading. Shnei dayos lahasbir dvorav shel Rav Asi. We'll see two approaches in how to explain teaching of Rav Asi al hadikotani regarding the Tanaic statement Yishava kama hoitzi v'yitol. That is what we saw in the Mishnah. V'kol Rav Asi, and Rav Asi said regarding that, v'hu sheyesh shevach keneged hoitzah. That's the statement he made. The translation would be, and provided that there is improvement, there is increased value corresponding to the investment. And then the husband divorced her. Now, let's see the Gemara. The Mishnah said, Yishova kama hoitzi vito, that when you have a husband that made investments in his wife's properties and did not derive any benefit from the peiros, from the fruits, the husband can swear how much he spent and receive compensation. Om Ravasi, v'hu shiyesh shevach keneged hoitzah. Now, this is true if there is improvement that corresponds to his investment. The Gemara asks, Lamai hilchasa, and in order to appreciate the question, let's take a look at Rashi. Lamai hilchasa, we're looking at Rashi in the lower part of the narrow lines. Lamai hilchasa ka'omar v'hu hoyo shevach keneged yitzia. Two possibilities. You can see we have them highlighted with diamonds in the Rashi. Li'akule alei, is this a kula, a leniency for him? Di'i iko shevach tvei, that if, as a result of his investments, there was more profit than his expenses, lo boi shvua, then there would be no need for him to take a shvua. Oy lachmuri alei, or this is a stringency imposed on him, ulameimar, and to tell us, Di'i yitzia yisera, that if his expenses exceeded the profits, lo shokil ela kishiur shevach, he would then be entitled only to the amount that corresponds to the profits, to the increased value. V'afilu b'shvua lo amrinon yishava kama oitzi vitol, and even with taking an oath, we are not going to say let him swear and get compensation in accordance with how much he had expended. Not so. But even with the shvua, in a situation that the expenses exceeded the profits, the increased value, he'll only be able to get the amount of expense, of investment that corresponds to the shevach, the profits in the field or in the property. So now these two possibilities that we read in the Rashi are in fact the two opinions that the Gemara reveals, Abaye and Rava, in interpreting Ravasi. The Gemara continues. Omar Abaye, what Ravasi was telling us is that the Mishnah that it said he swears and collects according to the amount he had invested. Abaye says Shi'im hoyo shevach yesar. So from Ravasi's comment, we learn that when do you take a shvua to collect your investment, to get compensation for the investment after divorcing the wife? That's when the shevach, the improved value, the increased value, is the same as his expenses. However, if the increased value is greater than his investment, than his expenses, noitel es ha'oitzo below shvua, then he's entitled to recover his expenses, his investments, even without taking an oath. Omar le Rava im kain, if that is how to understand Ravasi, then you're opening up a door for tricksters. Im kain osi la'arume, you're leaving room for trickery. What's the trickery here? So Rashi says, Osi la'arume, the Omar, a person will say, Botzir mishvacha porta, a person will claim his expenses as being just a little bit less than the increased value. the lishko below shvua, and that way he'll be able to get compensation for his investment without taking an oath. People don't like to take oaths. This will enable him to avoid that situation. Even though he's not going to be getting his full compensation, but it's worth it to him. As an example, imagine the shevach is 100, and 100 zuz, or $100. That's how much the property increased in value. And his hoitzos, his expenses were $100. Well, according to Ravasi, you'd have to swear in order to get your compensation. According to Abaye, if the shevach was $100 and the expenses were $99, so he wouldn't have to swear because of what we just said, that if the shevach exceeds the expenses, you get without taking an oath. So, and you don't have to swear. So Rava says, if that's the case, so then if a guy actually made expenses corresponding to the shevach, you know what he's going to do? He's going to say, I spent just a little bit less, and thereby be able to recover his expenses minus just that little amount, and not have to take a shvuos. You're inviting tricksters to practice their trade. Therefore, Rava says differently. Elo Omar Rava she'im hoisa hoitza yisera ala shevach. What Ravasi was telling us was that if the expenses, the investment exceeded the increased value, ein loy ela hoitza shiur shevach ubishvua. The husband will be able to recover his expenses only up till the amount of the shevach, and all of that only if he takes an oath. Revealing, describing how much he actually spent. As you can see, we have a slash mark indicating that which follows is a new trend of thought. On the side we have a topic heading, the nosei, which reads, Baal shahirid arisin lenichsei ishtoi. A husband, instead of physically cultivating the field himself, he sent sharecroppers to work the field. Just in general, a sharecropper or oris arrangement entitles the oris to a certain percentage of the crops that are produced. That's in general the oris arrangement. In other words, instead of paying a worker on a daily basis a certain wage, he is entitled as an oris to a percentage of the harvest. So a husband had hired arisin to work the fields of his wife, umishochal kimo omad v'girsha, and the husband benefited a little bit, as we saw in the Mishnah. He benefited a little bit, and then divorced his wife. Ma'u shitlu arisim kfi chelkon. Can the arisim demand their anticipated percentage of the harvest? Now the Gemara. Ibayaloho Baal shahirid arisin tachtov. A husband sent arisin to work the field instead of himself. Tachtov means instead of himself. Can the arisim get their expected percentage? And as we said in our introduction, the case here is where the crops had started developing, and in the meantime the husband had eaten a little bit, and now is the question of he divorces her. Can the arisim expect their pay in the form of a percentage of the harvest? Two sides of the question. That the diamond here is used to highlight the two possibilities, as we indicate in the Mivneh heading. So the Gemara continues, Adaito de Baal Nochis. Did the arisim go with the understanding of the husband. In other words, he is the one that sent them in to work, not she. And when the Baal is out of the picture, he divorced her, he's out of the picture, and he doesn't get anything based on the halacha we said already, that whatever expenses he made, and whatever he ate, and he did eat something here, as we said just before. So, since they're coming in because of him, the husband, their presence is only because he had ordered them, or he had hired them. He's out of the picture, so they're out of the picture. As the Gemara says, istalik le baal istaliku lahu. Istalik means to be removed. When the husband is removed from the picture in his divorcing of the wife, so they're out of the picture too. They have nothing to expect. Oy dilma. Or possibly adaito da'aro nochis va'aro ki kaimo la risi kaimo. Or they were hired for the purposes of the land, and the land is still there, and the land is let's say is destined to be cultivated by arisim. Rashi explains that if the husband had not sent them into work, the wife would have sent them into work. The land needs arisim. It's not a function of the Baal so much as the need of the land. That is the question. And there's a bracketed section, after which the Gemara concludes the question with the expression, Mai Havi Allah. Now, within the brackets, Rava asks regarding the first possibility. He's going to question the first possibility, and the Gemara will answer it. So the question, the basic question of the Gemara that began with the Bailaho, that remains till the end of the bracketed section. So now that having been said, we go in the brackets. Maskif lo Rava bar Rav Chonan. Rava bar Rav Chonan asks on the first possibility, my shno mehayored l'soich stei chaveroi v'noto shelo birshus shomen lo v'yodo ala tachtona. Why should the arisin be viewed any differently than a case of an outsider? Someone notices that his friend's property needs some kind of care, needs some kind of improvements, and without being invited, he goes ahead and creates those improvements. He does what needs to be done. He gets compensation. We'll call it it's not necessarily a full compensation, but he gets, as Rashi says, Shomen lo v'yodo ala tachtoino. Rashi explains toward the bottom of the Rashi commentary, Lito ayetzio shiur shevachi, is entitled to recover his expenses in accordance with the increased value. And here, in possibility one, we're suggesting boy lisluki below klum, the possibility of them being removed without any compensation. Why should they be in the position to receive no compensation when, in a similar situation of an outsider coming and doing services for his friend, the outsider is deserving of a minimum amount of compensation, as we saw in Rashi. So the Gemara answers there's a difference. Hasam, in the case of Yored L'Sos De Chavero, someone goes into his friend's field, as we explained, and he made improvements, he planted it without being invited to do so. There was no one else that was going to do it. You see, this guy, this outsider, was walking along and he saw that no one was tending to the property. So he was the only one. However, in our case of the woman married to a man, and the husband, he went and hired workers instead of his own doing the job. Well, Iko Baal the torah. There is the husband that could have done it. So she's figuring, there's this side to suppose that she can figure. He didn't need the workers there. He could have done it himself. Why should I have to pay a percentage of the crops to the workers when he could have done it himself? So the Gemara asks, "My havi Allah." What is the law in this case? Omer Rav Huna Braid Rav Yeshua Chazinon. We evaluate. I Baal Orishu, if the husband himself was an Oris, he knew how to cultivate property, and if they wouldn't have gone into the field, so he would have done it himself, then we say, Istalik le Baal Istalku lahu. When he's out of the picture, they're out of the picture. In other words, the workers were really, we'll call them non-essential. So she will not have to part with any percentage of the crops for them. If the husband had no capabilities in agriculture, then Aro Larisa Kaima, then the land needed to have Arisim, and she would have had to hire them anyway. And in that case, they will receive compensation. Before we continue, notice we have a slash in our Gemara indicating that which follows is a new trend of thought. On the side we have a topic heading, Ha'im Baal Yochel Limkor Karka Malug Shel Ishto Li'achir Leperos. Can a husband who, as you know very well by now, has rights to the fruits from properties that his wife brings into their marriage, here the Baal, instead of cultivating the property and keeping the fruits for himself, for the family, this husband sold the property. Now, not a full sale. He sold it only with respect to the fruits, so that some outsider will pay the husband a certain amount of money, and that will entitle the outsider to cultivate the field and benefit from the fruits. Now, is that a deal? Can the husband do that? Once again, we need not emphasize that a husband, with regard to the Nifsei Malug, he is not the owner of the properties. The principal belongs to the wife. He has only fruit rights. And in effect, what we're asking about, can the husband sell the fruit rights to someone else in exchange for, let's say, in exchange for cash? Now the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom. Baal shemochar karka leperos mahu. A husband that sold his wife's karka malug to some outsider for the outsiders acquiring the fruit rights. In other words, the outsider will cultivate the field and keep the fruits for himself. Mahu. Mi amrinon mai dekoni akni. Do we say that which the husband owns, he can transact? Now, what does the husband own? The husband had fruit rights, so he can transact that to someone else. Oy dilma. Or it could very well be something else. Ki takinu le rabbanon peres lebal, when the rabbanon enacted the understanding that the fruits of a wife's field go to the husband, that is we'll call it a mere privilege. Mishum revach beisa. It's only because by the husband harvesting the fruits of his wife's field, so he'll bring them into the house, and there's more food in the house. That's revach beisa. There's more food to eat. It creates greater abundance in the house. We're at the top of Omid Beis, where we read Mishum Revach Beisa, Avol Izvuni Lo. But to sell his fruit rights for cash, no, that is not part of the original Peiros enactment. The Gemara responds, and with their 2 Lishonos, you see diamonds that appear. There are 2 Lishonos in Rava, 2 versions of Rava. Yehuda Mor Bar Meremar Mishmei de Rava, Omar Masha Asa Asui. So the first approach, Yehuda Mar Bar Meremar says that in the name of Rava, that which the husband did, he did. It's binding. He's allowed to do it. Rav Papi Omar Mishmei de Rava Lo Asa V'Lo Klum. It's a non-deal. Now, the that would correspond to saying it's a non-deal, would correspond to the svora that the whole enactment of Paris was revach beisa. Now there's not going to be revach beisa. There isn't now an abundance of food in the house. He sold the fruit rights away to someone else. Omar Rav Papa. Now notice we have a long point here. Rav Papa makes a point. He says that Yehuda bar Meremar, that which he ruled that the husband's sale was a good sale, Lav befeirush itmar, it was not told to Yehuda Mor bar Meremar explicitly by Rava, Ela Michlala itmar. This is a very common expression that you see in the Shas, that someone reports a halacha, and the report was not based on an actual transmission, an actual Masorah from the source he's quoting, but by virtue of an observation of his, that did he come to the conclusion. And let it be known that when you see this structure, almost all the time, it invites a problem. In other words, there's a weakness that will emerge, a weakness in the logic that will emerge. So, Rav Papa is saying that the tradition that Yehuda Mar Bremer had in the name of Rava was not something that he received as a formal tradition, but rather based on an observation, and then we'll see how there's an inaccuracy over here. That's what Elo Michlola Itmar implies. What happened? Tahi Itza the Ailo Le Legavra Tarti Amsa. A woman married a man, and in marrying him, she brought into the marriage two bondmaids, two maidservants. And these maidservants are called Nichsei Maluk. That's called, it's property. She owns these slaves. They're her property. The husband is allowed to benefit from their cooking and their baking and what have you, but he doesn't own them their principal value. So she gets married, bringing two maidservants into the marriage that she owns. Also, Gavra Nosevit Sachriti. The husband went ahead and married a second wife. Ayu lo chada minayu. And the husband took one of the two maidservants and instructed her that she should take care of the needs of the second wife. Now, this is similar. Now, we're not saying it's exactly the same, but it's similar to the idea of, now, the husband had rights to their services, so what did he do? He took and redirected her services to a second wife. That's similar to the case of a husband selling the fruit rights that he has in the field to someone else. The first wife that brought in the two maidservants came to Rava and screamed. What's that? She was obviously opposes that the maidservants that were brought in to serve herself and her husband, fine, but now they serve a tzora, second wife. Lo ashkech ba. Rava did not pay attention, and it's now Rava didn't pay attention. If you were, let's say, Yehuda Mor Bar Meremar, looking at this situation, you might conclude that it's a function of the husband having a right to sell that which he was entitled to. Man de Chazer Savar. Now, Man de Chazer, one who saw this, would figure this is like Yehuda Mor Bar Meremar, Mishum de Savar, because Rava is of the opinion that which a husband did, he had a right to do. Veloihi. And here you see the Gemara says that conclusion is not accurate. It's not so. In other words, the action of Rava's ignoring of the original wife's claim isn't because the husband has a right to sell that which he was entitled to. That's not the case here. Rather, Mishum Revach Beisa, the issue with regards to what rights does a husband have? It is only if you consider the revach beisa possibility. V'ha korovach. And here, with the maid servants, there still was revach beisa. In other words, that second maid servant, she was still doing what they call tzorchei bayis. She was still caring for the house, for household needs. Maybe she was giving us more attention to the second wife, but more catering to her more so than obviously if she hadn't been there. But nevertheless, she is also participating in the household needs. So there is revach beisa, as opposed to the case of the husband selling the fruits of the fruit rights of his wife's field to someone else. There would be no revach beisa, and in that case, Rava would not have allowed the husband to sell the fruit rights to someone else. There, you would have all the produce wouldn't end up in the husband and wife's house in such a case. V'hilchasa baal shemochar karka leperos lo osa v'lo klum. The Gemara rules like Rav Popi, and in effect like Rava straight through, realizing now that Yehuda Mor Bremer had no reason, no right to conclude what he did regarding Rava. Now, my taima, why do we say that Baal that sells the fruits lo osa v'lo klum? So, if you look at, we have numberings here. So if you look at the second number, it's Rava. Well, we already know that. Rava said, in other words, it's just repeating what we said earlier, that Rava's concern is revach beisa, and you will be diminishing the revach beisa factor if the husband sells the fruits away. In other words, the husband was entitled to the fruits only because of revach beisa, and now that won't be, so he has no right to do it. Let's go over now. Abaye, number one. Abaye Amar Chayshin Shema Tachsif. We're afraid that if the husband sells the field for fruit rights to someone else, that other guy isn't going to take good care of the field. He knows that he's not the real owner of the field per se. He's only going to get the produce of the field, so squeeze the field for whatever it's worth just to get maximum produce without taking care of the essentials of the field itself. That's Shema Tachsif. He might let it go bad. And Rava Omar, as we said, the reason that Baal Shemocha Karka Leperos Lo Osa V'lo Klum is because Mishum Revach Beisa. The husband's entitlement to the fruits in the first place was only because of Revach Beisa and not for selling it to someone else. My binayu, what would be a difference between the analysis of Abaye and Rava? In other words, what's a practical difference? Give me a case where I'll see that in one case we'll allow him to sell and in one case not. And according to one opinion we'd allow him to sell and according to the other opinion not. So Iko binayu, the Gemara gives you three possibilities, three cases. A case that a situation that would represent a difference. Aro de mikrav lamasa, a parcel of land that's mikrav, that's near masa, near the town. In other words, where this couple lives, there is a piece of land that the wife owns, and the husband would sell the parcel of land that's near town. He would be selling it to someone else for fruit rights. So if the consideration is revach beisa, there is no revach beisa here, so he would not be allowed to do that. However, if the consideration is like Abaye said, that the purchaser is going to let the field go bad, but since it's close to town, it's not going to go bad. They'll be supervising the situation, so he would be allowed to sell it. Inami Baal Orishu. Another case is where the husband himself is going to continue working the field, and the purchaser, the fellow who purchased the fruit rights, will simply be receiving ready fruits courtesy of the husband's efforts in the field. Now, the fruits are going to be transferred to that outsider, so there's no revach beisa. So from Rava's standpoint, even if the husband is going to be working the field, there's still the reduced or the deprived revach beisa consideration. On the other hand, is the field going to go bad? No, the husband is going to take care of the field. Don't forget, this husband is always in the back of his mind. He's figuring that if his wife dies, he's going to be the heir to that field. Inami, another situation where there would be a point of difference. Zuzi v'ka'ovid behu iska. In exchange for the sale of the fruits, the husband gets cash. However, the cash that he gets, he reinvests. And through the reinvestment, let's say he takes the cash and buys a parcel of land, and from that parcel of land he produces fruits that he'll bring into his own house. So in that case, there is the revach beisa consideration. Therefore, according to Rava, in this case, he'd be allowed to do it. Once again, he's receiving cash, and provided he reinvests the cash for further profits, so you have revach beisa. However, according to Abaye, it wouldn't be allowed because there's still the fear of shema tachsif. The guy who purchased the field for the fruit rights will let it go bad. And now we come upon a new Mishnah. You can see it's a rather long Mishnah going to almost the end of the page. We have a topic heading on the side, the nosei, Dine hanechosim shenaflu l'shemeres yavam. Here we're going to talk about not a married woman, but a woman who is currently a widow. Her husband had died leaving no children, but there is a surviving brother. So she's not a free agent either. She is bound to the yavam. And while a widow in this state, she inherits properties. We will deal with zechus mechirasam, who has rights to sell those properties. And we'll discuss Mesa Ma Yasu B'nechasel. If she dies as a Shemeres Yavam, what is to be done with her properties? And there's a whole series of ownership elements or property elements that need to be discussed. The Mishnah: Shemeres Yavam Shenaflu La Nechasim. As a widow waiting for the Yavam marriage, hasn't taken place yet, and at that point that she's a widow, she inherits properties. Moedim Beisham Beis Hillel Shemecheres V'Neisenes V'Kayam. As opposed to previous Mishnayos where we saw Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai arguing about an arusa that inherits properties, this is different. She's a widow, and as such, Beis Hillel concedes, agrees with Beis Shammai that she has full control over the property. She can sell them, she can give them away, and the deal stands. Mesa ma ya'asu b'ksubasa uvenechosim hanichnosim vayotzim ima. The Shemeres Yavam, if she dies, what is to be done b'ksubasa? Now the term ksubasa, we look in Rashi, b'ksubasa b'nedunya shechnisalo v'shamasalo b'ksubasa. The ksubasa is a reference to the dowry that she brought into the marriage, and it was assessed and it was written down. It was written into the ksuba, v'kibula v'achriyusan, and the husband had accepted upon himself to guarantee maintenance of that value. For Rashoy Lotziim, the husband himself had a right to sell those properties, being that in the ultimate case of his divorcing her, she would receive the value that was recorded in the ksuba of those properties. So now we have a Shomeres Yavam that dies, and there are these properties that have been written into the ksuba. We call them Nichsei Tzon Barzel. They're nechosim, they're properties that are like iron. Their value is doesn't, just like iron is solid, their value remains solid. The husband had accepted upon himself, as we said, achrayas, ensuring their value. So that's one issue. And the second is b'nechosem hanichnos yotzim imo. That's a reference to nichsei melug. Those are properties that a woman had brought into the marriage, but their value had not been written into the ksuba. Those kind of properties, as we've seen already numerous times, are properties that the principal is owned by the wife. The husband had no right to sell them. When they come into the marriage with her, and when she leaves the marriage, they go out with her. Now, these properties are there, and she died. What happens? Beis Shammai omrim yichalku yorshei habal im yorshei av. The heirs of the husband and the heirs from her father's side, in other words, from her family, they split. Now Rashi takes pains to point out that Beis Shammai is referring to the nichsei melug. That is split between the two. With regard to the ksuba, that Rashi says, according to Beis Shammai, you won't have the yorshei av splitting it with the yorshei habal. And just a detail that even though the Mishnah had asked, what are we going to do with the ksuba as well as the nechosim hanichnasim yotzima, Beis Shammai addresses only the issue of the nechosim and nechosim yotzima, doesn't deal with the ksuba. And all that information you can find in Rashi. We continue. Ubeis Hillel oimrim nechosim b'chezkosan. Now this phrase b'chezkosan is not clear. Rashi points out that the Gemara in Bava Basra deals with that issue. What b'chezkas whom? So we'll leave that as such. What else? Uksuba. The ksuba referred to here, and all of this information you see in Rashi is a reference to the money that the husband owes to his wife. If he divorces her and now she's a widow, that's the basic mona or mosayim. If she had been married as a widow previously, it would be 100 zuz. If she was a virgin, a basula, she would be entitled to 200 zuz, and any extra that the husband had guaranteed the wife. So that's called the tosefes. So the ksuba is that, the basic 200 zuz plus the tosefes. Beis Hillel tells you, b'cheskas yorshei habal. It remains in the husband's family, the husband's heirs. Nechosim hanichnasim v'yotzim, that is the nichsei melug. Those are properties that she brought in to the marriage from her father. Those are properties that the husband had no right to sell. So, b'chezkas yorshei ha'av. Those properties will be inherited by her side of the family, her father's and his heirs. We continue. Hiniach ochiv, the husband who's now deceased. When we say ochiv, means his brother, because we have in the foreground we have the yovam, the surviving brother that's anticipating marrying this woman, but we understand she's right now she was not didn't marry, didn't do yibum. Hiniach ochiv mo'os. If the brother, and here we're dealing with from the context you can see, here we're dealing with a standard case. You've got a shomeres yavam, and meaning she's alive, and the brother had left. The deceased brother had left mo'os, had left cash. Ilokach bohen karka v'uochel peros. So the money is used to buy a piece of land, and the yavam will benefit from the fruits. Let's take a look at Rashi. Ilokach bohen karka lefi sheksubasa al nichsei bailo harishon kiritoni lekamon. her ksuba is paid from the properties of her original husband. Lefikoch nichsei hameis achroin liksubasa. Therefore, the properties left by her deceased husband are duty bound to cover her ksuba. Elosha yavam oichel peros im miyabem oisa. The yavam will be entitled to eat the fruits if he marries her. Now we didn't mention that before, but never too late. When the Mishnah says yilokim amkav hu ochel peros, if he does yibum with her, the yavam is entitled to the peros. The kosovar, this point in the Mishnah, in other words, the Tanakama, the Chachomim here in the Mishnah are of the opinion metaltali mishtabdi liksuba, that even the portables of the deceased husband, the portables as well are bound to the ksuba payment. We continue. The brother left number 2, peiros. The brother left fruits. What kind of fruits? So aleph, hatlushin min akarka, fruits that were not attached to the ground anymore. Yilokach ben karka v'ochel peiros. So the yavam will, like we saw just before, he'll buy a parcel of land, and if the yavam, if he's miyabim or if he marries her, he's entitled to the fruits. Hamechuborim bekarka. The husband died leaving a parcel of land with fruits attached to the ground. Omer Rabbi Meir, Shomen oisa kamo hi yofa beperos v'kamo yofa below peros. We make an assessment or an evaluation of how much the ground, the field is worth with the fruits and how much it would be worth without them. And that differential, the hamosar, that difference, yilokach ben karka v'ochel peros. The yavam, upon marrying her, would take the value, that differential value, and buy land and derive benefit from the fruits of that purchased land. V'chachomim omrim, peros hamechuborim b'karka shelo. The chachomim at this point, at least, we see them saying that attached fruits belong to the yavam. Hatlushim min akarka, the fruits that are detached from the ground, that were left by the deceased. Kol hakedem zocha bohen. Whoever comes first gets them. Kodam hu zocha. If the yavam takes them, he keeps them. Kodmohi, if the wife, if the widow, the wife, now because she does yibum, if she takes them, then yilokach bohen karka v'hu ochel peros. A parcel of land is bought, and she's considered the owner of that, the owner of the principal of the land, and the fruits the yavam is entitled to eat. Konsa harehi ki ishto l'chol davar. When the yavam marries the yavama, the widow of his brother, she's like his wife for all purposes. Bilvad takes subasa nichse bailo rishon. The only difference being that, assuming that there was an estate left by the first husband, the first husband's estate is used eventually to pay her ksuba, if that should come to be. Lo yoimar law, the yavam should not say to the yavama that he marries, harei ksubasech munachas ala shulchan. He would allocate or take an amount of money and put it on the table and say, there is your ksuba. Ela kol nechasav achroin l'ksubasa. Rather, all the property that he inherited from his brother, all of it is bound to the payment of her ksuba, up till the amount of the ksuba. If we skip the bracketed section momentarily, Girsha, if a yavam divorces her after he takes her in, ein law elo ksuba. After divorcing the yavama that he had taken in, he then pays her the ksuba, and that's it. She gets whatever the value of her ksuba was. Now Rashi adds here, Ein lo leksuba avol kol zman shelo girsha, as long as he hadn't divorced her, kol hanechasim mishubadim la, all of the properties are bound to her. V'eino rashoy limkor, he has no right to sell them. Now we skipped a section. Let's go over it. V'chein lo yomar odom liishto, just like we said regarding a man who marries the avama, a man who has a wife, standard marriage, person should not tell his wife, Harei ksubasech munachas al shulchan. Here you see your ksuba, the amount of your ksuba. Here it is. I'm delineating, I'm earmarking these specific funds for your ksuba. He shouldn't do that. All of a husband's properties are bound toward the payment of the ksuba. The Mishnah then continues. Girsha, we said, in the case of the Yavama, divorces the Yavama after he had taken her in. Ein lo elo ksuba. All she is entitled to is the payment of the ksuba. And as Rashi said, that before the divorce, so all of the property that he inherited from his brother she had a lien on it for her ksuba payment. But assuming that the estate was worth more than the ksuba, upon her divorce she gets only the ksuba. Hechzira, if he decides to take her back, harehi kechol hanoshim, ve'ein lo elo ksuba bilvad. She is considered like any other woman, and just like a man who divorces his wife, he can take her back. And when he takes her back, he's taking her back with the understanding that her ksuba is the original ksuba. On the side of the Gemara, we have a topic heading, and as you can see, we're close to the end of our daf, and we're at the beginning of a new topic. Bear in mind that we'll begin the topic, but the topic itself extends for quite a while beyond the context or the confines of a Daf Yomi style shiur. So let's begin the topic. We've glanced aside, we read the topic heading says, Shemeres Yavam Shemesa Mi Kovra, a woman who was waiting for the Yavam to marry her, but it never came to be. She died. Who is responsible for her burial? Ibayaloh, the Gemara asks, Shemeres Yavam Shemesa Mi Kovra, who is to bury her? Yorshe Habal Kavrila de Koyarsi Ksubasa. Do we say that the heirs of the husband, they are to bury her because they are the ones to inherit the Ksuba? O Dilmo Yorshe Av Kavrila, or maybe her family is to see to her burial. De Koyarsi Nechosim Yotzimima, because they're the ones that are going to inherit the Nichsei Malug properties that she had originally brought into her marriage. Omar Rav Amram. So Rav Amram attempts to provide us with an answer. He cites a source, Toshma Desanya. We have a Tanaic source that says Shemeres Yavam Shemesa. We continue at the top of Daf Pei Aleph. Yorsheha Yorshei Ksubasa Chayovin B'Kfurasa. Those of her Yorshim, meaning she had two sets of Yorshim we saw already. So those of her Yorshim that inherit the Ksuba, which are the Yorshei Habal, the Ksuba being the Mono Mosayim and the Tosefes Ksuba that we made reference to earlier. So we'll say that privilege of inheriting the Ksuba obligates them, Chayovin B'Kfurasa, obligates them to see to her burial. To whatever expenses, whatever is needed to see to her burial, they have to pay for that. Omar Abaye Af Anan Nami Tanina. We have a Mishnah that bears this out. And up till now, so we saw Rav Amram quoting a Brisa, and this brings more strength to it, hence Abaye's comment that we have a reference to this in a Mishnah. Now the reference is from what we call a yitur lashon, and like extra terminology, and that is a point that Tosfos makes. But nevertheless, this source will be a support. What does it say? Almana nizaynis minichse yisaymim. A widow, as a widow, she derives her food support from the properties that the husband's heirs inherited. The nichse yisomim are literally the properties of the orphans. Umaysi yodel shalahen, her work production goes to them. V'ein chayovin b'kvurasa. The yisomim are not obligated to her burial. Yorshel yorshek subasa. Now, you see, we're talking about, in our sugya, in our topic, we had been discussing a shemeres yavam. Now, shemeres yavam there are no yisoimim. There were no children. So, this part of the source we'll call it an extra expression in order to teach about that case of the shemeres yavam. We just pointed out that when there are orphans and they inherited an estate, they're not obligated to her burial. A husband is obligated to bury his wife, but he died before she did, so it's not the orphan's responsibility. Yorshek subasa chayovin b'kvurasa. Now there's this expression of Yorsheho Yorshik Subasa. We're talking about a woman that has a couple kinds of Yorshim. And what kind of woman is that? The Ezuhi Almonosh Yeshlo Shnei Yorshim. What kind of widow has two sets of heirs? Heveyomer Zu Shomeres Yavam. As we saw earlier, when you're dealing with a woman, a Yavama, she was waiting for the Yavam, but she died before the Yibum. We see that the properties that are left are inherited by, some of them by her husband's family, some of them by her father's family. So she has two sets of heirs. So the Mishnah here is alluding to the Yavama, the Shemeres Yavam that died, and it says that those who inherit the Ksuba, namely the Baal's, the husband's family, they are the ones that have to see to her burial. The sugya itself continues with a flurry of questions and answers. And if just by scanning ahead of the page you can see all of these triangles that are flip-flopping along the way. This is an attempt to keep track of the give and take stop, but of course we'll have to pick that up in our next shiur.